Final video, sand dunes. We're almost there. So sand dunes are a bit different. We find beaches all over the place. We find spits all over the place, but we don't really find many sand dunes. We need very specific conditions. So the first thing we need is we need a nice strong wind. Let's draw that on there. There we go. Just to show wind. And we need a nice big sandy beach. So let's just draw a bit of a sandy beach on here. I'm not going to draw it to scale because otherwise the beach would take up most of this and then you get the small amount of sand dunes at the back. But you need a really nice big, very shallow gradient sandy beach. And that beach has got to have what we call a large tidal range. And tidal range is from when you've got a high tide to when you've got a low tide. Now, I know it doesn't look very big on this diagram, but again, when we go to West Witterings and have a little look, you'll see how massive the beach is when the tide goes out. The reason this is really, really important is imagine you've got a whole load of wet sand and you blow on it. The sand's not going to go anywhere. It becomes sticky when it's wet. But when that sand has dried out and you blow on it, the sand goes everywhere. So if you've been to a nice sandy beach on a windy day, you'd have probably been sandblasted by sand. So to have a large tidal range like this, from high tide to low tide, it means it gives the sand a nice amount of time to dry out at the top end so that it can be transported inland. Hence, large tidal range is really, really important. Again, it's a sandy beach, so we're probably going to have, if you've watched the beach videos, a nice shallow gradient anyway, and that's what we tend to find. So the wind is really important as well, so otherwise the sand's going to stay there. We need a way of that transporting inland. Sand dunes, if you've ever been to one, aren't a wet environment. The water never gets into the sand dune system. So the only other method of transportation is either we take it and dig it there. Of course, sand dunes are a natural feature. We definitely haven't done that. So the only other way it's going to get there is via the wind. And there are three ways in which it gets there. So one way is in suspension. So the particles are actually just carried in the wind and transferred inland. But it's only a very small percentage, only about 1% of sand is transported that way. And again, if you've been to a sandy beach on a windy day, you've probably experienced the sand being carried in suspension and thrown towards your face. But luckily, most of the way that sand is transported is by something called saltation. And we mentioned this when we did transportation lesson in class. And what happens with that is the particles simply sort of bounce and hop along the floor. So 95% of our sand that's transported is transported via saltation. Saltation is a really nice word for it too. If you were to go and get some table salt in your house and pour it out onto a work surface, the particles would hop along the work surface. So hence the word saltation is quite a nice one. So let's write that on. Saltation. And this one, as we said, is suspension. The final one, and again, it's only 4% actually does this, is one called creep. And that's where you've got lots of particles and they're just kind of pushed along the floor. And they slowly creep up the beach. But like we said, this is the most important one. Most of our wind-blown sediment hops along and gets transported back up the beach. So we've now got wind, we've got sand. That's kind of all we need really to start off the sand dune system. Or is it? So if we've got loads of sand and your sand from your beach is being blown inland, the danger is if there's nothing to catch the sand or stop it, it's simply just going to carry on blowing inland and it wouldn't stop. So there's got to be something to start to catch the sand and slow it down. And what we find in the early stages of sand dunes forming is that it can be something as simple as, I'll draw over here, a shell or a bit of seaweed. And what happens is as your particles are being blown in, they will eventually get to your shell or bit of debris and it will become sheltered enough for it to start to deposit. So all this wind-blown sediment then starts to get trapped. And what it will do is it will slowly build up this side of your bit of debris. And eventually it will become established enough that there'll become a little sheltered part here. So sand particles will kind of blow up this this side here and will sort of cascade down the back and then end up being deposited down here as well. And as you can see, over time, you end up with a tiny little mound of sand. The only thing now left to be done to make that stay there is to get some sediment trapped by some vegetation. So what you'll end up with is some species of grass, very, very easy marram grass to grow in a sandy environment. And a seed or two might sort of stop there. They'll grow some nice roots down and start to cement that little dune in place. And these are called embryo genes because they're the very, very first genes that you have in a sand dune system. And so they'll be the ones that form just over here. So there's your little bit of debris underneath. There's a few little bits of vegetation, and your roots are nicely holding that vegetation in place.
Mummy,
hang on. Sorry, trying to do this with a child is a bit of a challenge. So we've got our embryo gene. Let's just get rid of that, and then we can label it. Again, you'll need to know the names of these. Embryo gene. There we go. So after this, the genes become then a bit more established. So the next one will be a little bit bigger, and we'll have a little bit more vegetation on top. Go. Again, all this vegetation has nice long roots, and that just holds all the sand and sediment in place, makes it nice and firm. And this dune is called our 4 dune. Spelt 4 as in like when you play golf and you shout because the ball's gone a long way away, you shout 4. So yeah, a bit of a different spelling. Again, as we go further in, our dunes will get progressively bigger and progressively more vegetated. So our next dune will again be a bit bigger, a bit more vegetation coverage. I won't do all the roots, I'll be here forever. This one is called our yellow dune, aptly named because it is yellow in colour. Although, to be fair, all of them up to this point have been yellow, but for some reason they call this one the yellow dune. After that, we have something called the grey dune. Again, a little bit bigger, more vegetated. By the time we get to the grey dune, we'll start to see different vegetation. So you might get some little shrubs, you may get some little flowers and things like that in there, sort of little flowering plants. Put some flowers in. And the reason it's called the grey dune is because now it's got to the point where it's got so much vegetation that as the vegetation dies and it decays, it kind of produces like a soily material, like, you know, when leaves fall off the trees in autumn. As they break down, they're kind of like a dark colour, and as they mix with the yellowy sand, they make a sort of a grey coloured sand, if you like, hence the name the grey dune. After that, we have a strange little area that goes down, and it goes down beneath the water table. So the water table is simply, let's just kind of draw it all the way along. The water table is, if you dig down, and when you go to the beach and you dig a big hole in the beach, you'll eventually get to a point where your hole starts to cave in and you'll see water at the bottom. That's because you reach the water table, and you can effectively dig pretty much anywhere and eventually you'll get to the water table. It's just the layer where naturally the water gets to, and it sort of sits in the soil. The water table will adjust depending on lots of different factors. So if you have a large period of rain, for example, the soil will fill up with water a bit more, so the water table will go up. If we get very dry conditions and we get drought, the water table will start to go down. So the dune stack in this example is filled with water at the bottom because it's gone below the water table. But sometimes in the summer, the dune stack might be dry. Again, when we go on our field trip, we may well find that it's dry if we've had a nice, hopefully, fingers crossed, warm, hot summer. So that's our dune stack. And then after that, we have one more thing, which is called the mature dune. So again, it's even bigger, it's even more vegetated. And this is where we start to find normal sort of plants, things that don't mind. So all these things over here don't mind being sort of inundated with salty water now and again. But the stuff on the mature dune all the way back here is stuff that doesn't really like salty water. So it's your normal vegetation that you'd find in your garden or a forest, and that could be anything up to an oak tree. So our last one here, mature dune. Oh, we didn't label that one, did we? Our dune slack. And this will get everything from trees to shrubs to other sort of plants, but we can get anything up to the biggest sort of tree in our system in the UK, which is an oak tree. These grasses and things down here, lots of them have different names, but the one I'd like you to remember is the grass that first starts off is often something called Marram Grass. And if you want, again, some A-level terms, that's what we call a pioneer species, because it is a species. Oh, let me move that into view. Sorry, I didn't realise it had gone off a bit there. That is what we call a pioneer species, because it pioneers this environment. It's the first one to start to colonise this environment with vegetation. Other than that, there's not much more to say. So you can see some of the features that change as we go inland. So the dunes get higher and steeper, and they get bigger, they get more vegetated, and they also change in colour from sort of light sandy colours to more grey and dark colours as we go further back, as we get more organic material. And the type of vegetation slowly changes to bigger, less tolerant vegetation as we go further back too. These ones here are nicely salt tolerant. They don't mind salty water, they don't mind salty conditions. Again, if you want a really cool term, they're called halophytes. Again, you'd learn more about those at A level. But I think that's about it. So good luck with your projects. I'm looking forward to seeing them. Goodbye.